Great question. I like to think in terms of multimodal mobility, all of us in this room have something I call a mobility utility. And you think about economics 101, what is the type of modality you want to use? How much time do you have? How much money do you have to use it? I think multimodalities and multimobility is the ability to use whatever mode you want at any time, having perfect data around what those modes are available and the ability for you to access them at any point of time. And that's the vision. But on a standalone basis, it's being very cognizant that there's not just a binary outcome in terms of how you can get to A to B, but use different modes across the board.
That's a very good definition. Mark, would you like to add anything to that?
I would love to. But first, this panel was not for white guys originally, so I just want to be really clear.
Wait, I'm white?
You're going to hear perspective from four white guys on some of this stuff, which obviously does not represent the full spectrum of experiences and everything that goes into this. But, for me, multimodalism is, how do you make it as safe, easy, affordable to, get around or get things around, right? And there's never going to be like one way to say like, this is the easiest way and the safest way and the cleanest way and the most affordable way, right? Unfortunately, right? And for a lot of us, we just drive, right? And because it's easy and affordable, and that's sort of where we end up choosing. But there's also sort of the goods piece, and I think Chris and I were talking earlier, and Ryan, I bug his ear off a lot about this, is when we're talking about like freight, right? And we're talking about cleaner freight and things like that, we often just kind of focus on like the technology of a truck, right? Versus thinking through, other ways of moving goods. I'm very up on maritime and ports and things like that, on how we can sort of achieve those same goals, but sort of looking at multimodal on how we move goods as well. So long answer. Sorry, Ryan.
Yeah, Chris, anything to add?
Of course. So what multimodal means to me, means to Michigan, means to the Office of Future Mobility and Electrification. The cheesy answer, the optimistic answer is truly whatever we can come up with together, right? So when the Office of Future Mobility and Electrification was created 3 years ago, 2020, the charge was very big, right? Mobility and electrification. But we've had to spend working with very closely with our partners a lot of time defining exactly what that means. So we take a very broad approach to it. Mobility is the movement of people, goods, and information, right? And electrification is a bit of a misnomer because it really talks about the way all of those modes of transportation are powered. So OFME is a multi-state agency, Department of Commerce, Energy, Economic Development, and Talent, because each of those departments, and there's a ton of people that are doing amazing work in that space, have a role to play in securing Michigan's future, right, in this multimodal, not just automotive, advanced powered, advanced movement state that we're all pursuing. So we're very fortunate not only the volume of projects that we get to participate in, interact with, the number of partners that we get to interact with, but really just continue to see Michigan leading from a visionary perspective about how we're going to turn that legacy into tomorrow's legacy, right? And really continue to be the world's leader in all things mobility, right? As broadly defined. So obviously these guys had home run answers, hard to follow, but.
Okay, perfect. So now we know what multimodal mobility means. So the most important question of the day is, how can we make Detroit the world's best multimodal city in USA, let's say? I don't know. Mark, would you like to start?
Oh, we can't.
I'm sorry?
I don't think it's possible.
It's not possible. Okay.
So I mean, just starting there, right? And it's not. You look at what goes into the answers that we just talked about, and there's lots of challenges that Detroit is way behind on. And I worked in the mayor's office for 4 years. Did my best to address some of these, right? But you compare Detroit to if you're saying in the world, right? Like if you're comparing Detroit's investment in transit and you're comparing Detroit's and the region's land use planning and patterns, you're comparing Detroit's focus on freight and how we move goods, it does not rank on a list, right? That doesn't mean that like we shouldn't be doing stuff, right? And I think what Ryan and his team and Chris has been at this for so long is to say we're not building a subway, right? That's not happening. So how can we sort of make improvements on what we have traditional ways, but also try and bring in new things, right? So that we can jump ahead, scale, and sort of get to these answers. But the idea that billions and trillions of dollars are going to come in to catch up on this stuff is just not a thing that's going to happen.
Okay, Chris, can you give us some positive and
I totally
energy?
agree with you, as usual. I actually think that if we look at it through the lens of traditional systems to enable personal transport or a multimodal across air, land, sea, and space for logistics, I would agree that it's going to be really difficult to do, but I think it's a misnomer to think about public transit as something that we must have in the way it's been delivered for the last 100 years. So if you have 6, 7, 10, 15, 20% ridership of your multi-billion-dollar public transit agency with tremendous bureaucracy, oversight that isn't serving the people, the citizen, or the public purse, the question I would ask is, how do you spend money better? How do you think about service provisioning that's much better? How do you look at differentiated ways from a usage perspective that I live in downtown Detroit, so happens I don't own a car. Doesn't mean I'm not in a car a lot, but I try to use as many modalities as I can from a personal perspective. And so we were talking earlier, like I was just in Amsterdam at the Energy Conference, and you look at the bike culture in the Netherlands and in Amsterdam, it's unbelievable. I think about land use in North America, or especially in Detroit. Now, is there a big switch to making Detroit, a culture of biking that everyone's on every day? It totally is. But is this something that we can do in a very real way, in innovative ways to use that land? I think we can. And so my contention would be, when it comes to port logistics, when it comes to the fact that we have certain logistics providers that sit at the hub of rail, road, and river, when we think about the assets that we have coming across the border every day, currently on the Ambassador, soon to be the Gordie Howe Bridge, I get encouraged as I think about the efficiencies that can be driven by new technology deployments and have leap technology where we don't have the legacy issues of major metropolitan areas around the world that are servicing public transportation assets that frankly don't necessarily serve their people. And I agree with you, it's difficult in where we are now in a variety of ways, but I do think we can be a really dynamic hub. And I'd like to see us be that.
Thank you. Ryan, you're working for the Michigan Mobility. What do you see for the future? What are the synergies with the state and the different players?
Sure. I think partnership is, to answer your question in one word, and then to go back to what these guys were saying, right? I think Mark hit the nail on the head, right? If we're expecting kind of a silver bullet solution to come in and say, yep, Detroit's now the global leader in this for this one specific reason, I think that's a really tough bar to meet. But to Chris's point, I think so much has been happening given the collaborations, given the investors, given the ideas that are here and are now given a space to do so more freely and more appropriately, and even acknowledgement and even the creation of our own office right by the governor, or the city, Mark's work at the city and now the Office of Innovation at the city, or even the building that we're sitting in, right, is just a celebration of getting an opportunity to bring those ideas in a way. Like multimodal is not automotive, right? Our legacy is, but as I always say, the car is one of the most sophisticated pieces of technology on the planet, right? If we only ever think of a car as a steering wheel, 4 wheels, and a body, well, we're discounting so much of the effort that goes into what that means. So taking that approach and then turning it kind of into what we're doing at the state is we understand that automotive is a technology game. Multimodal can be a technology game, right? There's a huge tent for people to get engaged with the future. And I think back to my original statement, I mean, the reason that we're all here today is to explore how we can better do that together. There's an energy here that's palpable. And I think Detroit continues to show up as kind of a global leader and a beacon for opportunity, given where it was just a decade ago, right? Seeing the transformation, living it, and just having more people be here to engage with the space and really open that up. And we need to continue also, I think, to Mark's point a little bit, to be more inclusive about how we're doing that, making sure that we're not discounting the participation of any communities, because not everyone has the same level of access. So to the state, what we've been working on, right, is working with MDOT to ensure mobility as a service providers throughout the state, right? We launched a mobility wallet platform last year where we put a RFP out and have solicited responses to try and address that equity opportunity, right? Make it easier for people to engage with all of their surroundings, be it, Mogo, a great company that's here doing amazing things in Detroit. The Q Line, which has been doing much better, right, has expanded their operations over the last little bit and have high aspirations. And I'm rambling now, and I apologize, but I'm very passionate about how Detroit is just one symbol, I think, of what's happening in other cities. Ann Arbor, Grand Rapids, we work very closely with them and look to continue to engage other cities around the state too, and make sure that it's not just a Detroit thing. Mobility is not just a Detroit thing. Multimodal is not just a Detroit thing, because to Chris's point, we have ports all around the state. We have so much fresh water. How are we engaging that? Freight forward, right? How are we engaging that in a meaningful way? So, sorry, I'm getting fired up.
Can I be more positive?
Please.
Still gonna be negative, but I think a lot of what it takes is so the average. My wife does not think about how can Detroit be the most multimodal city, right? This is not a thought that goes through her head. She thinks about like why she's irritated about driving, right? She'll be like, I like this area because I can walk there, right? And maybe it's like I feel safe with my daughter going out and biking on these streets, right? Like, so the majority of people in Detroit, Michigan, are not thinking about this idea. So it takes pushing, right? It takes pushing from the top, right? From political leadership. It takes pushing from sort of that middle of people that are doing the work, and then it kind of takes push, from a bottoms up, from sort of advocates to sort of be able to kind of make all these pushes. Because if there isn't sort of a demand from and kind of a urgency from all these levels, right? It's going to get stuck in different ways, right? It's either going to get stuck on like these are platitudes, but nobody's building it. It's going to stuck at staff people saying like these are the projects we want to do, but we don't have political cover, or it's going to get stuck with advocates saying like why is no one listening to me and why am I here? And that's to be honest, like been the challenge, right? Of that this is important, right? And continually important to kind of keep making it. And the state is focused on growing Michigan right now. I think they've heard a lot on all these issues, right? That this is part of what makes a place attractive to a person, whether they think about it directly of like they don't say the word multimodal, but they're like, this is a place I want to live.
Okay. Just one quick aside I'd mention as well is like we're talking about lessons learned from other cities, and that's a good thing. But the challenges and the opportunities we have in Detroit are unique to Detroit. I don't want to be Austin. I don't want to be San Francisco. I don't want to be Boston. I want to be Detroit. And we have an opportunity. The way that we do this, to your core question, is we do this. All of us here who choose to say we're going to make this the most sustainable city in North America that is focused on human dignity and the way people move and all the way things that move around us. We can do that. That's on us. And I think that's what I get excited about when I think about the community that is the city of Detroit.
Thank you for your passionate speeches. Thank you. You spoke about MDOT, so let's talk about the project between MDOT and CAVNU, where you're constructing a shared autonomous vehicle lane on I-94. I don't know, Mark, could you introduce us to that?
Let's talk about cars. So regardless of the technology on the vehicle that you're driving, whether it's a Ford Blue Cruise that you've got out there or these fully autonomous vehicles, all these vehicles can only see so far ahead of themselves. And also, struggle with what's called edge cases of things that are not expected. So you drive on 94 in different areas and you see different tar patterns going across the lane lines. Some level 2 systems struggle with those things. So the idea that CAVNU is developing is not a new idea, right? It is an idea of like, how can infrastructure support the technology on the vehicles themselves? And it's a fairly simple concept. I mean, it's very complicated to build, but from a standpoint of like, you're simplifying the road itself and providing more information on what's happening ahead. The challenge and why, this has never happened in this country is because, you've got the auto industry saying, this is neat. This would be great information to have. But number one, and primarily, I can't put a new piece of equipment on my vehicle, right, to receive signal and pass $3,000 on to my customer if there's no signal for that to receive, right? And to this point, there has not been in this country. And then from a government standpoint, they can't basically say, we will put all this infrastructure out there, right, and use the public dollars to do so, but have no vehicles actually using it, and say, why are you not paving our streets when you're putting all this stuff up on the roads? So the company was formed to basically try and bridge that gap, right, and bring private capital in to, defer the risk on both sides and try and kind of get this wheel going. If the federal government came out tomorrow and said, we're going to do 10,000 lane miles of digital infrastructure that's going to provide information on what's ahead, all the OEMs would jump up and say, this is great. Like, we can now build product because we have reliability as a partner. But that reliability has not existed. And you look at what's going on in China right now, and China, obviously has a different governance structure, let's say. But they're able to say, like, we are going to make infrastructure and autonomous vehicles work together, right? Like, they're investing in both these sides because, it just makes the problem much easier to get to the use case. So, Michigan jumped out early on this project. Companies worked very closely with MDOT. Right now, if you're driving down westbound on 94 towards Ann Arbor, you'll run into the construction, which is a pilot that's being constructed right now. The first 3 miles of both the technology and the lane itself. And essentially, the use case that they're looking to enable is essentially what's hands-off, eyes-off driving, right? So what's called level 3 driving. You're in your vehicle, you get the lane, the information, you're able to do something other than driving, which is much more compelling than just taking your hands off the wheel, right? It's an actual, like, this is of interest. And it's been a huge challenge to sort of get there, but, OEMs are starting to go there. And the challenge, right, is for Cabinet as a company is to be able to show tech is working, right? And that's what the pilot is being developed, but also being to show scale, right? To most OEMs, like 40 miles in Michigan is like, that's a cool science project. It's not something we're going to build product to. So, it's a big swing, right, on this idea and sort of trying to move this needle. And 2 weeks ago, FHWA announced, they're going to sort of start to invest a little bit more in digital infrastructure. Secretary Pete is apparently getting more interested in sort of this idea of what can be done, because you didn't jump up at sort of this idea on autonomous vehicles, but it's a challenge because, you've got different timelines between the government and between who build vehicles. And, they all say this would be great, but we're planning for our 2027 model right now. We can't be stuck in here. So it's a very ambitious company. Michigan, first out there to begin to do it. The company just announced a project in Texas that's looking at autonomous trucking as well. So it's an amazing future to think about, right? And the idea that, like, you can have this and infrastructure's supporting it and getting you to the safety level, but it's a tremendous challenge.
Okay. Yeah, very interesting. How do you work with the different cities, different zoning? I know either you or Ryan have something to talk about.
So because it's a highway use case, there's not a whole lot of coordination, right? Like, most cities don't care about what goes on the highways, right? But, as it starts to get into more urban areas, to me, the use case is likely transit in a near term of just like creating a lane. So, it's a big education topic whenever you're talking about any of these things, because, again, this is something that most people don't really think about. But you start to think about, like, if you can supplement, existing transit with automated transit and sort of, adding more density and sort of really starting to create this opportunity at a lower cost, as Chris was saying, there are some opportunities to begin to do new things, like building more density, building more walkability around this piece, and kind of adding more transit as part of the solution.
Okay. Chris or Ryan, anything to add?
I think there's so much. First off, this project is one that we're super excited about because it's a culmination of a lot of efforts, and Mark talked about a lot of them. But back to the point that Ivana made when we started this panel, right? It's a great case study in how infrastructure and policy need to be moving forward together, right? So Michigan is among the national leaders with the deployment of connected roadways, right? So as far as like digital infrastructure, be able to capture data from vehicles, we are a national leader, which is awesome. The automated piece is one that's coming with this pilot. But my reason for pointing that out is that wasn't just something in the past little bit, right? It's been something that MDOT and the state of Michigan have been working towards deliberately for quite a while to make sure that we're improving the lives of Michiganders and all the users that are on our roadways. But back to the policy piece, right? Just laying it all out doesn't mean that there's an immediate adoption, right? Or there's immediate appetite for all of it to happen. So in addition to the Office of Future Mobility, we have a council that's convened as part of executive statute from the governor's office for the past 3 years. That's a mix of public sector, right, including the governor's office, the state agencies I've already talked about, as well as a significant number of private sector representatives that can come together and actually present ideas to the legislature, who have active participation on the council as well, to say, look, here are the ideas that we have, here are the ideas that the market is supporting, here are the ideas that the community wants, that residents are moving towards. So how can we put them into action? And if I'm not mistaken, the Cabinet project in and of itself required some special policy changes in order to allow it to happen. So, you know, what a lot of folks don't see behind the scenes is the culmination of a lot of effort. And we're doing better to try and speed up the red tape processes. But, you know, the amount of studies and investigation, and to their credit, you know, I know MDOT takes a very active interest in making sure that they're engaging with the communities that they're in. So I just want to give them a lot of credit, and then know that we are hoping that this is the first of many projects that we can pursue like this, because we need to continue to push, right? We need to continue to say, we can do it in Michigan, right? We can do it because we are doing it in Michigan. And this is just on highway, right? We fund other projects that can use similar technologies on a much smaller ecosystem. The Michigan Mobility Funding Platform is something that we administer direct grants to on a much smaller scale that can help supplement the entire ecosystem and address some of these smaller ways that people can more effectively transport themselves through a community and into other ones. So I think if you look at it as part of a holistic picture, it's a lot of really great things happening, and I think just the tip of the iceberg. So, and to credit to Mark, because there's a lot of thought leadership that he put into this project that I think he's too modest to say. So.
Okay, I'll go ahead,
I was
Chris.
just going to say the only thing I would agree with that statement. Even if you weren't here, I'd say that. The other thing I'd say, which is really important, is I think the only projects that will be sustainable in the future of mobility infrastructure are those that are sustainable. And what I mean by that are those that are economically viable and make money over time. And so as a state, I believe we have to be very careful around how we think about subsidy at the beginning to start out new initiatives for a variety of different ways in which they're going to bring attributes to our state and to our people and our citizenry. But the public purse cannot subsidize something indefinitely for the purposes of deploying what we want to deploy when there's better opportunities in the marketplace. And so when I look around the United States right now, I think there are a variety of folks looking at digital infrastructure, and I'm a huge proponent of digital infrastructure. It's the bedrock of how we see the future of the way the world moves across different vectors. But I think we also need to be really, really focused on how do we ensure that the services and technologies we're paying for in the state best serve our citizens. And that needs to be something we come back to maybe more than we do.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to change topics a little bit. So the next question is going to be about mobile justice. So this was a new word for me. I kind of looked it up on the internet. So I'm going to read what I learned. Is mobility justice is a vision for a world rooted in social justice, where people feel safe existing on the streets and can build lives, experience the full joy of movement regardless of race, religion, background, or physical ability. So I would like to know, how does your choices in infrastructure and transportation affect mobility justice?
So this is where having four white guys on a panel to answer this question is not great, because we all basically have the same experience, right? And to be, blunt, I think, I know these two guys have heard it before, but, when I, was in the mayor's office, I learned a lot, period, right? But particularly a lot about the challenges and struggles that everyone goes through, right? That I did not see by, the fact that, I'm a white man who can afford a vehicle and does not have to sort of worry about choice, and I'm able-bodied and doing all these things. And, it's the hard hard problem, right? Because when you're in the space, and whether you're working in government, whether you're a founder, right, you're often like solving your problem, right? You're saying like, what do I know, right? And what are the problems I'm trying to solve? And you don't know the problem of the single mom who's got to take a bus to drop her kid off and then take 2 more buses to get to work and figure out how to get there. You don't know the problem of elderly man in a wheelchair who's got to deal with sidewalks that aren't plowed for weeks at a time. And to be honest, like nobody looked at this 10 years ago, right? For the most part, right? Except for people that were really forward thinking and sort of worked in the space and sort of really understood personal challenges. And it's a thing where it's just like especially in the city, right? Like so many people just struggle to get where they want to go. And when you think about types of solutions, you're saying you have to think about like who is this benefiting?
What needs to change? What policy? What infrastructure?
All right. We'll just give you a real story. So I don't work for the mayor anymore. I can tell the mayor stories. So when I started in the mayor's office, GM had invested in Lyft, and GM's like, you got to do a Lyft pilot. And the idea when I walked in was like, let's just provide Lyft service in this neighborhood, right? And just sort of give them rides, and this will be a thing. And I was just like, well, why, right? I was like Tom Hanks in Big, where he's just like, I don't get it. Like I was just like sitting there, I was like, I don't get it. But what we knew, right, is we ran less bus service at 2:00 in the morning than we did at 6:00 in the afternoon. So we said, if Lyft wants to do something, like let's do a partnership that can actually help people, right? And say like, how do we provide credits for people that are taking the bus during these hours that still might have to walk an extra mile because their bus isn't running? And that's just one example, but all sorts of examples, everything from how you provide materials in different languages to DDOT. This is Dan Dirks, the guy who ran DDOT when I started. He would have everybody who did not drive a bus would have to spend a day in a wheelchair getting around the city, right? Just to begin to experience all this stuff. And it's in the city here has started disability office, right? To begin to give a voice to this. It has a great civil rights office. But it's hard, right? And I've got a friend who's just starting an accessibility business to just kind of focus on EV charging, right? To just understand, like, if you can't walk to an EV charger, right? Our EV charger is accessible to you, and there's lots of people who want to do the right thing, but oftentimes just sort of have a blind spot just because it exists, and it's just like a thing of just like constantly like challenge yourself in learning. Because it's just like, you're just never going to know everything.
Okay. Yeah. Not easy. Chris, so what's your opinion on mobility justice?
I mean, I think it's tough when we group individuals by groups without thinking about individuals as individuals. And what I mean by that is, so we all have different experiences on stage. It so happened I served 4 years in the U.S. Army, the most diverse organization in the United States. And I had the pleasure and privilege of serving alongside men and women who brought different perspectives to everything they did every day. So when I think about like, what do we need to do? What do people want? What does everybody want? They want safety, they want availability, they want accessibility, and they want affordability. And our mandate as a people in a city, state, federal government should be to make sure every American has those things. And that's something that we need to think critically about when it comes to how are we looking at U.S. DOT policy, state DOT policy, city DOT policy, the whole gamut, in terms of being honest about the fact where are the gaps that people aren't getting those things in very honest and real ways. And where are the ways in which we need to make sure that we're furthering human dignity. And so I think when we look at this through the lens of the other, and I think we do this sometimes, not in a way in which is meant to be pejorative or negative, I think we don't necessarily focus on the root of what we must supply to every American, and every American wants those things.
Thank you. Ryan, something to add?
I don't think I could answer the question better than those two did. And I mean, I can't, to Mark's point, I can't sit up here and talk about experiences that I haven't lived. I'm an urban planner by education. I'm an economic developer by profession. And to Chris's point, like, I try my best to make sure that we're engaging individuals as the individuals that they are, the light that they bring to this world. And I think that this is a term that I also hadn't heard before today. But our new Chief Mobility Officer, Justine Johnson, this is something that she presses upon us often, daily, right? Is how are we thinking about this concept of equity, this concept of justice in all of its many forms, right? Because it can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. So again, I don't have a better answer.
Okay. Yeah. Next question is about mobility. So how does mobility fit in the citizenscape, people, their jobs, and the urbanscape? Specifically, what are the dynamics? And maybe if you have any other examples from other cities, please go ahead and share. Chris?
I mean, I'm not sure what you're looking for here. I think mobility is every day, all day for all of us in this room. Yeah. It's like, how am I going to most efficiently and most economically go from A to B, or we define mobility, which I thought was a great definition, as the physical and digital movement of people, goods, data, and energy. That's a lot. But just thinking about it from the perspective of what does that mean in terms of a functioning city, having those options available, having something that is truly dynamic and providing people with, again, safety, affordability, accessibility, those things that people care about. I don't think you can have a functioning society without mobility being first and foremost around how we make that society happen. To Mark's point, people don't think of it that way. No one's talking about mobility like we are, but I think it's core to humanity.
Okay. Yeah. Before you said you don't want to become like Austin, but do you see any other cities or something in another city that you want to bring to Detroit?
I see things in every city I go to that I want to bring to Detroit, but I don't want anyone to tell me what I need to have here from their experience in another city. So, I mean, I think biking culture in Amsterdam is unbelievable. I'm a huge believer that you can't know a city unless you walk it. I walk everywhere. I think you need to make sure that you have differentiated options available that aren't just automobiles. But we were talking about multi-mobility earlier, and you think about new initiatives, the 15-minute city or dense urban centers that are closed off from certain modes in which you can only use electrified, tuk-tuks or different ways in which you're thinking about, assets that are there for those uses. That is something we can do here, but it's tough from both the political will perspective and the funding to do it. But I think there's many lessons we can learn, but there's only one right recipe for Detroit. And that's something we're going to come up with.
Okay, I like that. Mark, something to add?
So I'm going to change your question if that's okay.
Go ahead.
Talk about innovation and mobility, but I think that there's lots of opportunities to utilize technologies that are out there, sort of close to out there, to improve quality of life, quality of a mobility experience that don't necessarily have a $100 billion market cap, right? But are things that people can use. So my friend who runs a small VC yesterday sent me like this robot that's just going to do lane striping, right? And you think about just like if you could just like send robots out to restripe crosswalks, right? On what a game changer that would be of just like improving safety, right? If we had sidewalk plows, right, that were robots, right? That could just go out and plow sidewalks. Like that's a huge public works challenge. Just mowing lawns, right? Like mowing vacant properties in the city with robots, right? So there's still like tons.
I like how you got progressively more dangerous with each robot.
I did like RoboCop.
Built a city.
But you start to see like there's still tons of opportunities, right? To use technology to improve quality of life, to improve how people get around, and not just simply saying like, how do we reinvent the car? I think this is where like, particularly, in a world right now where like people like Chris are like, how are you going to make money before I give you money? Where, 18 months ago, like people was throwing cash around, not Chris, but like other people.
I would never do that.
There's solid businesses out there, right? And I think it's kind of like the more people like Ryan that have worked in government that can then be able to work with technologists, say like here's problems that continue to be solved, continue to be huge opportunities. But until we get to that point, and I agree with Chris on sort of what should the ultimate outcome be, right? Of like people just feel safe, people feel affordable, right? There are so many problems still to go out and solve.
Okay, Ryan?
So I agree with Chris. I don't want somebody else to tell me what's prescriptive for Detroit. And I'm going to take also a slightly different approach in your question, as these guys have too, and say, I know we're here to talk about urban sustainability, urban multimodal, but it's an opportunity to make sure that we're considering our rural communities too, because they have even more unique and distinct challenges than a lot of times we catalog in sessions like this, right? Michigan is a very large state, right? And we have the best of both worlds. We have a world-class city in Detroit, and we have world-class smaller communities and smaller cities, but we have to almost treat them as the individuals, not almost, we have to treat them as the individuals they are, as if they were people, right? They have their own considerations. What's going to work in Grand Rapids will not work in Marquette. What's happening in Traverse City might work in Detroit, or it might not. So to try and take lessons from elsewhere, and I know that, that's the easy thing to do. What's the off-the-shelf solution from Boston? Detroit could have had a subway. Well, how would it have been? It's like we're not there now, right? Because we haven't developed that way, because we've grown up in a different way as a state. So making sure that, again, the tent is big. I keep saying that because we can't just consider Detroit. We can't just consider Grand Rapids. I grew up in a town called Hemlock, Michigan, about 20 miles outside of Saginaw, and I didn't have a bus that I could hop on to get into the city, right? If I rode a bike, it was kind of dangerous. I had to go 7 miles to the nearest house, right? So it's just a different set of values and considerations that we need to be making. And I thought it important to make sure that if we're talking about sustainability, especially with transportation and especially multimodal transportation, that we're considering how big our state is and appreciating all of those things and those people and those communities as well.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We have about 5 minutes left. Do we have any questions from the audience? I think there's a man with a black shirt.
Thank you all for your comments. Thank you again. So my question is, it has to do with whether you all believe that where you direct innovation, where you direct attention of developers, of companies that are based in buildings like this one, how you determine if that is delivering the most effective solutions to your problems, mobility-wise mainly. So I guess, do you use some sort of metrics to see if these solutions are actually working? What metrics do you use? What do you prioritize for, what your goals are for mobility statewide?
Oh, that was a tough one. When Chris is like audibly groaning up here. No, I mean, it obviously depends on the use case that you're looking for, right? But to me, I'm a very outcome-based person. So are you delivering sort of the outcome that you're looking for, right? We oftentimes get focused on metrics on just counting, right? Versus saying are we doing better, right? So in the mayor's office, mayor's got a lot of metrics that are just posted in the cabinet room that are basically everything from bus time to EMT response time, right? And that's what he's judging. And because ultimately the metric, though, that he is judging himself on is population, right? And those are the metrics that end up building into it. So, but it can be hard sometimes when you're sort of doing these pilots and sort of doing these one things where it's like you're focused on is it working, right? Versus are we actually sort of getting to the outcome? Because lots of things are going to end up going into that equation.
We have a core thesis that it's the intersection of the innovation and the industrial centers of the Western world that's going to create the most value. And so Detroit is a classic industrial Western center. And you look at places like a London or a Boston or a Tel Aviv, for example, and they're more the innovation side. But these hubs here and being able to leverage industrial, whether it be allied shored or onshored production, that's going to be, I think, a multi-billion-dollar opportunity. But the reason I was audibly groaning, which is Marcus right, Your question's a really hard one because you asked, how do you know that you're actually improving outcomes? So scale and being able to grow product, grow idea, grow service, that's telling you that you're growing. And that's telling you that you're building something that has demand. But you must hopefully begin with something that truly is a positive for society in that initial idea. So are you scaling something that actually has a negative societal impact or a positive societal impact? Scale can't define that. It's going to be defined, I think, by the way it affects families and communities and you and I and elderly and children and our entire community in different ways. So it's a tough thing to measure. But I would offer, if places like this can create unbelievable entrepreneurs that are scaling ideas that move the world, not just point A to point B, but with the underlying ideals that we celebrate, with the ideals that we hold dear around what should a society be for myself and my neighbor and my city and my country. That's something I think that's really exciting, and I believe places like this will.
And if I could just jump in really quick, I'm sorry, I know we're running out of time, but to that point, because that was a great question, a really great question. Every project has to be evaluated on its merits, especially from the state, right? Every community is different. But the way that the governor and the way that we evaluate as an office, people, place, project. People, how can we invest in our talent? How can we make sure that they have access to great jobs? Places, how can we create vibrant communities throughout the state? And projects, like what are the investments that need to be made to come in there? So if you look at those three kind of high level things, then it's an opportunity to take each project at its merit to be able to move along.
Okay, Ivana, do we have more time for questions or? Yeah, go ahead. She's in the front.
Thank you so much. So Mark, Ryan, and Chris, I think you guys have done a really good job of explaining to us what multimodal mobility is. I'm quite interested in finding out from you, what are some of the potential benefits and challenges of implementing such systems, especially as we think of Detroit, when we have legacy systems that are in place? And then how do you incorporate innovation on top of them in such a way it's not disruptive to, I think, your native Detroiters and the folks from here? What are your thoughts around that? Thank you.
I don't know if you teed this up because you knew what I was going to say. But for instance, paying for the bus was really hard here 5 years ago. We had a spreadsheet or a picture that showed there were like 49 different passes between DDOT and SMART. So we did two things, right? Like one, we simplified the fare structure, but I could not crack like the people that worked on the fare box stuff. Like I just couldn't get them to say like, let's get further so that you can pay with whatever you want, right? So what we did was we just built a mobile app on top of the legacy system instead of breaking the entire system. So that is the sort of, how can we tactically kind of go in and put Band-Aids over things before we break the whole thing. But at some point, the whole thing needs to get broken to sort of like get further. Because it's just like, you can't Band-Aid over everything. And that's just like one example of, a city service that's got a legacy piece and vendor control and things like that.
It's a great question, I think, because we look at legacy systems around the West, and if someone has been utilizing a certain way or a way of paying, a way of using a mode, a bus stop that they're used to going to in their community, how do you introduce new approaches that are better uses of the public purse, but that in no way leaves anyone behind? You can't move to an entire mobile payment structure if people are still using cash, and they want to be able to use that, or they don't have an ability to do those type of ticketing methodologies. So one of the things that I always say is I think the way that we do this is we're honest about the resources we have. We're honest about what our community needs. There may be new ways in which people are going to have to adjust in terms of going from A to B, but no one can be told they can't. And I think this idea of prioritization is something that's been lost in much public discourse as it relates to this exact question, because we have to prioritize. We don't have unlimited funds. We don't have unlimited modes. We don't have unlimited ways to do this. But if we prioritize wisely, servicing the needs of those in our community who most need them, which are in many ways are elderly. In Detroit, many communities across the city and across the state, if we do that wisely, we can use new technology, spend less money, and actually increase service, but understanding that we do need a fixed line bus somewhere so people have that peace of mind. But I think it's being creative, and it's also being able to say, I don't know definitively how this is going to work, but to Mark's point, we have to do something else because what we've been doing is not sustainable.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Thanks for your passionate answers and conversations. Thank you.